What was the reaction of the Wehrmacht soldiers to the news about the outbreak of war against the Soviet Union? The impending attack on the Soviet Union was carefully hidden from German soldiers and officers until the very last moment. Unlike the situation with Poland, when the German leadership announced its intentions in advance, the attack on the USSR remained a secret. The Soviet government was not charged, and for a long time even the non-aggression pact that was concluded between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was not broken. Instead, there was a massive disinformation campaign aimed at misleading both the Soviet secret services and German soldiers. The German command actively tried to convince Stalin that their main goal was to continue the war with Great Britain, and aggression in the East should not be expected this year. Therefore, for most Wehrmacht soldiers, the news of the outbreak of war against the USSR came as a complete surprise. Most of the Wehrmacht personnel learned about the outbreak of war either on June 21st, 1941, or on the day of the attack on June 22nd, when German troops crossed the Soviet border. The soldiers' reactions were varied. Many of them were amazed by the suddenness of the event, because hardly any of them really expected an immediate clash with the Soviet Union. There was often confusion and bewilderment, and some soldiers, even being prepared for the war, could not realize its scale and consequences. The memories of the surviving Germans often indicate that many did not believe in the seriousness of the outbreak of the conflict, perceiving it more as a temporary operation than the beginning of a large-scale war. German tankman Alfred Rubbel recalled that in early June 1941, their division was sent to the east, and many of the personnel expected that they would be sent to fight in Iran or the Middle East. There were rumors, which may have been spread by the propaganda of the Nazis, that the Third Reich had begged the Soviet Union for the rite of passage, and now the British were finished. At that time, Erwin Rommel had been fighting in North Africa for several months, saving the Italians from defeat. However, the order to begin the invasion of the Soviet Union was read out to the German soldiers only on the evening of June 21st. Alfred Rubbel recalled that, despite this in general, everyone expected a successful campaign, similar to those that took place in Poland or France, although he was a little worried about it personally. What was my mood like? I was depressed because it was clear that we would be fighting against the Russians. We are going against the state, which in its then state was an unknown quantity. I knew about Berezina, about the Battle of Borodino, about the burning of Moscow in 1812, and about the death of the great French army. And yet, to be honest, we wanted to go to war. This is how Alfred Rubbel recalled, noting that, despite the realization that they would face a powerful and unknown enemy, many of the soldiers were waiting for the fighting to begin anyway. Infantryman Erich Hinrich recalled that his unit learned about the outbreak of war with the Soviet Union only on June 22nd. The commander informed the soldiers that the Wehrmacht had already entered Soviet soil. However, as Hinrich noted, this news caused surprise among the personnel. In this context, there is some contradiction. Everyone knew about Napoleon's fate, but there was no preparation for such a war. For example, winter uniforms, an essential element for waging war in the East, were missing, despite assurances from German soldiers that winter clothing had not been prepared. According to Hinrich, everyone was amazed by the news, and many, including his colleagues, could not believe that the war had started with the Soviet Union. One of the colleagues in particular said, "It seems to me that we will all die in Russia." This thought probably reflected confusion and fear of the unknown. Lieutenant Heinz Kuhn was also surprised by the outbreak of war, but as he admitted, "I didn't think about this topic for long." He stressed that his superiors had ordered it, which meant it was necessary. In such a situation, the decision did not cause much thought, as the command dictated the actions. Anti-communist propaganda and the belief that the campaign would be successful and would be completed as soon as possible, like previous wars, played a role in the perception of the war. This opinion was shared by Siegfried Erth, a former Wehrmacht mountain ranger, who also acknowledged that the war was a surprise. However, according to him, no one thought for a long time, and most expected a new success, similar to the one in France. Luftwaffe pilot Klaus Fritzsche, in turn, at the end of June 1941, talking with his father, a veteran of the First World War and an extreme right-wing activist of the Weimar Republic. Apparently, Klaus Fritzsche's father was one of the Freikorps commanders and later became a member of the Steel Helmet organization. Fritz's dad expressed the opinion that Germany actually lost the war by deciding to attack the Soviet Union. This thesis was very common among many Nazis. Their parents perceived the outbreak of war with the USSR with great skepticism, and after June 22, 1941, they believed that the war would be extremely difficult. However, young people who did not remember the hardships of the First World War usually did not share their parents' doubts. They trusted Hitler and their officers, believing that the German army could handle any task. Only a few remembered the fate of Napoleon and his army, which were defeated in Russia. So the Austrian Joseph Wimmer, on June 21, 1941, told his commander that they could repeat the fate of Napoleon's great army, which was a harbinger of possible difficulties in the future. Nevertheless, such statements, as a rule, were perceived with restraint, and in a certain sense, it would be worthwhile to divide them by 10, since a victorious mood prevailed in the Wehrmacht. The German soldiers could not imagine that the war against the USSR would lead the Third Reich to collapse. Interestingly, there was a difference of opinion among German soldiers about the moment of the turn of sentiment towards pessimism. Some claimed that it happened in the winter of 1941, when the first cold winter set in the battle for Moscow began, while others believed that Stalingrad was the key moment. One of the first shocks for the German troops on June 22nd was the strength of the resistance provided by the Soviet soldiers, despite their small forces. So an entire German battalion of 800 men was forced to be held back by only 5 Red Army soldiers for 4 hours. Elsewhere, about 100 German soldiers could not cope with a single fighter who continuously fired machine gun fire from his fortification, preventing them from advancing for more than 2 hours. There were dozens of similar situations on the first day of the war when the Germans faced the incredible resilience and determination of Soviet soldiers. In addition, the Germans were shocked by the high professionalism of the Soviet pilots. Although Soviet aircraft in the border areas were practically destroyed on June 22nd, those aircraft that managed to survive caused a lot of problems for the Nazi pilots. Despite the numerical superiority of the enemy, these planes continued to strike at the enemy, demonstrating perseverance and skill. One of the German soldiers recalled that before Stalingrad, about 40% of their forces were Romanians, Hungarians, Italians, and volunteers from other European countries, but almost all of them disappeared after the defeat at Stalingrad. This defeat was a turning point that changed the course of the war, and many of Germany's allies were knocked out or retreated, leaving the German army in a difficult position. Young soldiers who went to the front in 1942, 1943, or even 1944 often mentioned their hopes for a secret weapon that, in their opinion, could change the course of the war. These hopes for a miracle weapon remained relevant until 1944, when the situation became increasingly desperate. However, if we talk about the soldiers of the Wehrmacht in June 1941, then it can be unequivocally stated that there were very few people like Alfred Liskov, a corporal who escaped from his division and tried to warn the Soviet side about the impending attack. In general, the Wehrmacht soldiers believed in victory and did not think about possible defeats. Friends, this is how the video turned out. And what do you think about this? Write an answer in the comments and do not forget to subscribe to the channel and put likes.